Welcome to the Holistic Health Bites podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Nicholson, crime scene investigator turned functional health investigator. This podcast is here to share bite-sized episodes and unique interviews on a wide variety of health topics to empower, enlighten, and educate you to live your best, most vibrant life. Disclaimer: all information you hear on this podcast is for information only and constitutes individual opinions of the person speaking. This should not be taken as medical advice. Being a listener of this show does not initiate a practitioner-client relationship between you and the hosts or panelists on this show. Please discuss these topics with your medical professionals before making any changes to your health. Okay, let's dive in. Welcome back to the Holistic Health Bites podcast. Today, we're going to dive into the mind-body connection and the placebo effect. I love this quote by Dr. Robert Trivers. What the brain expects to happen in the near future affects its physiological state. The power of the mind can help us heal or create disease. When we think positive thoughts, our brains release endorphins, which can block pain perception and increase dopamine synthesis. In contrast, chronic use of opioid medications suppress the production of endorphins and the receptors on which they act. Placebo is somewhat considered in a negative light these days, but it actually used to be a big part of routine medicine. It used to be used by physicians to give patients peace of mind and for their comfort, giving them something. Today, we mostly only hear about placebo in the context of drug trials, where a portion of study participants are given a placebo rather than the drug being evaluated to test the effectiveness against essentially nothing. But that's really inaccurate. Placebo isn't nothing. So let's run through some amazing findings published in the literature about the power of the mind. First up, hypnosis speeds the healing of bone fractures, as confirmed by x-rays. Patients also reported less pain and quicker improvements in mobility. Next, 30% of hypertensive patients, or those with high blood pressure, were able to maintain ideal systolic blood pressure for at least 1 year on a placebo drug. Next, students who inhaled a placebo but were told it was a toxin with 4 known symptoms developed those symptoms. Children could reduce 50% of ADHD medication dosing and maintain improvements with placebos. Autistic children receiving secretin treatment experienced 15% improvement in symptoms versus 28% improvement in the placebo group. What's even more interesting in this particular study is that even though the placebo was actually more successful, 70% of the parents still wanted their kids on the secretin treatment as a means of doing something. Next, adults with spinal fractures received either a vertebroplasty surgery or a sham surgery, and they experienced nearly identical pain reduction. So for the sham surgeries, even the surgical team did not know in advance which patients would get the real surgery and which ones would not. All of the patients got the same prep, same anesthesia, same incisions, same sutures, everything except for the actual spinal work. The surgical team was handed an envelope during the procedure telling them which group the patient was in. So that reduced the likelihood that the doctor or the team would somehow give it away. They didn't even know. The final result was that both groups found pain relief, dropping from a 7 out of 10 score to a 4. And some of the sham participants even reported a full remission of pain. 35 patients with moderate Parkinson's disease who were undergoing standard pharmaceutical treatment were given the probability of receiving the real medication versus placebo in this particular study. So they were told that there was a 25% chance, a 50% chance, a 75% chance, or a 100% chance that they would be given the real drug during this study. All participants actually got the placebo. The participants in the 75% or 100% group, meaning they believed they had a high likelihood or a guarantee of getting the real drug, saw dramatic increases in dopamine release in the brain as seen on PET scans. In this case, Both prior experience with the real drug and the positive expectations of continuing to receive the drug were key to the brain actually releasing more dopamine naturally. Most antidepressants are widely known to not be any more effective than placebo, continuing to show the effect patients believe they'll get from the drug can be what drives the benefit, not the actual drug. So the drug itself can sort of act like the placebo. A pain-killing trial evaluated capsaicin injections as the pain stimulant. When capsaicin, the active ingredient in cayenne pepper, is injected just under the skin, it causes heat and pain. They had participants inject small doses in very specific spots on their body and then used a placebo cream topically in specific areas to help with the pain. They experienced relief only in the areas where they applied the cream. So in any area where they didn't apply the cream, they still had the pain. Half of asthma patients perceived nearly equal self-reported relief from placebo inhaler versus albuterol, even though airflow was significantly more improved with the albuterol. This was a crossover trial, so all participants received both the albuterol and placebo at different points throughout the trial. And yet they self-reported benefit even with the placebo, even though they actually weren't getting the same benefit. 52% of colitis patients reported dramatic relief, and many showed reduced intestinal inflammation after placebo drug intake. Up to 40% of infertility patients get pregnant while taking a placebo fertility drug. 36% of patients with chronic headache experience relief with placebo when studied against an interventional drug. When there was no interventional drug being compared, they didn't get the same benefit. 200 patients were given a specific diagnosis and told they would feel better in a few days. 64% did feel better in a few days. In those who were told that their diagnosis was uncertain and their outcome really wasn't clear, only 39% felt better in 4 days. Patients who received a comforting visit from the anesthesiologist the night before surgery required less than half as much painkiller post-surgery as the group who didn't have the pre-surgical visit. Setting negative expectations for the likelihood of pain increases the incidence of perceived pain. The same for perceived side effects from drugs. For further reading and learning on this topic, check out the Spontaneous Remission Project with over 4,000 references on unexplainable healing. I also recommend books like Mind Over Medicine by Dr. Lissa Rankin, The Biology of Belief by Dr. Bruce Lipton, Suggestible You by Eric Vance, and You Are the Placebo by Dr. Joe Dispenza. Until the next, be well and vibrant. Thanks for being a faithful listener to the podcast. Did you get value from listening to this show? I'd love it if you left me a review on this podcast so that others can more easily find this valuable information. Did you know I also work one-on-one with clients and my practice is entirely virtual? I approach solving health challenges like I approached solving crimes, by conducting a thorough investigation into your case. Sadly, hundreds of millions of people in the US have poor metabolic function, insulin resistance, prediabetes, and diabetes, and the vast majority have no idea because their doctors aren't looking in the right places. I'm here to fix that without unnecessary medications. If you struggle with low energy, stubborn weight, hypertension, sleep disturbances, or any other undesired symptom, and you want a natural, lasting approach to correcting the problem rather than masking symptoms, apply to work with me. The link is in the show notes.